The distribution of human knowledge has always been considered progress, like the printing press, public libraries, universal education, and now the internet, making information more accessible to anyone with a device. But there is a problem that we haven't fully come to terms with. That unprecedented access to knowledge does not mean that you are actually engaging with knowledge, obviously. And in the fact, the ease of accessing other people's interpretations has made it a lot easier than ever to avoid thinking for yourself. You can encounter Nietzsche's ideas through memes, Stoicism through motivational videos, and existentialism through viral threads. But what you're getting is not the ideas themselves, but instead someone else's interpretation of the ideas, which is what you're doing right now. And when you build your understanding entirely on these intermediaries, you are not developing your own thinking. You're simply outsourcing it to other people. Now, Kant called this intellectual tutelage, which is the condition of letting others do your thinking for you. And he argued that it atrophies your capacity for independent thought even when you are perfectly capable of it. Now, Mill called beliefs that you have never personally examined dead dogma, ideas that you hold as prejudice rather than living truth, which you can neither defend nor truly understand. Both philosophers were arguing that genuine understanding requires direct engagement with sources and arguments, not just consuming what others tell you about them. And both recognize the difference between thinking for yourself and letting others think for you, and this determines whether you are intellectually free or intellectually dependent. Now, it's not to say that you can't value other people's opinions or go and seek knowledge on the internet, but it is to say that the more you rely on others to simply grant you knowledge, the less you are able to defend your ideas and think for yourself. So let's start with Kant on tutelage. Kant's 1784 essay, What is Enlightenment?, opened with a definition that remains one of the most important statements in philosophy. Enlightenment is man's emergence of his self-imposed tutelage. Tutelage in this context means the condition of being under someone else's guidance, the way that a child requires adults to think for them because they have not yet developed the capacity for independent judgment. Now, self-imposed tutelage means that you are intellectually capable of thinking for yourself, but you allow others to do your thinking for you anyway. Now, it's easier to let others think for you than to do the difficult work of thinking for yourself. You don't have to struggle through complex texts, work through different arguments, or risk reaching conclusions that contradict what you've already been told. You can simply accept what your priest or professor or preferred media source tells you is true. And you never have to experience the uncertainty that comes with genuine inquiry. The safety and comfort of letting others do your thinking for you is the primary barrier to intellectual autonomy. But Kant argues that the cost of this comfort is catastrophic. When you consistently let others think for you, your capacity for independent thought atrophies in the same way that your muscles would if you never use them. You can still repeat what you've been told and summarize their positions, but you can't actually come up with individual independent thoughts. So when you encounter a new situation that your authorities haven't addressed, you're essentially helpless. When your positions are challenged in ways that you haven't heard before, then you can't respond except by appealing to what someone else has said. You have become intellectually dependent. Now, Kant encourages his readers to dare to know, and it is a call to courage, not just intelligence. Having the courage to use your own understanding without guidance from another does not mean that rejecting teachers or experts or refusing to learn from people who know more than you. It simply means taking ultimate responsibility for your own thinking, which does require doing the work of understanding for yourself rather than accepting conclusions because somebody else told you to. You can still read others' arguments and learn from their insights, and even build on their work, but you have to engage with those arguments directly rather than simply deferring to their authority. And this extends well beyond philosophy. In your political life, your religious life, and even in your family life, relying on your opinion rather than somebody else's is so important for a healthy relationship in all of these areas. Now, of course, Kant isn't arguing that you need to become an expert in everything, because that would simply be impossible. Instead, he's just saying that you need to understand the difference between accepting something because you thought it through and accepting something simply because you have not. The person in tutelage and the person who has achieved intellectual autonomy might reach the same conclusions about any given question. The difference is not necessarily in what they believe, but in how they hold those beliefs. But let's say that you don't necessarily believe that, or you don't want to take up the responsibility of reading all of these massive texts of literature. Well, then you run into Mill. John Stuart Mill's On Liberty contains one of the most important arguments for why intellectual autonomy actually matters. Mill argues that even if you hold a belief that is completely true and you are getting your beliefs from a credible source, if you hold that belief without having personally examined the arguments for and against it, what you have is dead dogma rather than living truth. Dead dogma is a belief held as prejudice or received wisdom. You believe it because you were taught to believe it and everyone else believes it, and because authorities told you to trust that it was true. You might be able to repeat the standard arguments for your position, but you don't really understand them because you have never had to think them through yourself. And you certainly don't understand why people who disagree with you are wrong because you've never seriously engaged with their arguments. If someone challenges your position, you can cite authorities or appeal to consensus, but you cannot actually defend the belief because you don't understand its foundations. Living truth is actually belief that you have arrived at through rigorous examination of arguments on all sides. You understand not just the reasons to believe something, but the reasons people have not believed it. And you can explain why those opposing reasons are insufficient, or alternatively, it might change your mind on a few things. You have encountered the strongest versions of opposing views and thought through why you still find your own position more compelling. Mill's argument is that most people, even the most educated people, hold most of their beliefs as dead dogma. They believe true things, but they believe them the way children believe what their parents taught them, without examination, understanding, or the capacity to defend and explain. And this matters because beliefs held in this way are vulnerable in ways that living truth is not. Mill gives the example of Christian moral teaching in his own time. Most Christians, he argued, believe that Christian morality is true, because why wouldn't they? But they hold it as dead dogma, inherited from childhood, never seriously examined or compared with the alternatives. They can recite Christian moral principles, but they don't quite understand why those principles make sense or how to apply them to situations that their teachers never anticipated. They have never seriously considered what non-Christian moral frameworks say, or why someone might reject Christian ethics. So they can't actually defend Christian morality except by asserting that it is what they were taught. The result is that their beliefs might be a little bit shallow and brittle, and can be shaken by arguments that they've never encountered before. Not necessarily because the arguments are good or even true, but because they've never developed the capacity to evaluate those arguments and go against it. It doesn't guide their lives in any deep way because they don't really understand it. They just know that they're supposed to believe it. So, Mill's solution is to insist that genuine understanding requires encountering opposing views in their strongest forms. You need to read what your opponents actually say, not what your own side says your opponents believe. You need to understand steel man versions of opposing arguments, the very best case that can be made against your position, not straw man versions that are easy to dismiss. And you need to think through for yourself why you still hold your position despite the opposing arguments. It's much easier to read only people who agree with you, to encounter opposing views only in the dumbed down versions that your own side presents, and essentially to avoid anything that might make you question what you believe. But the cost of this comfort is that you never actually understand or truly believe your own values. And I say all this to say that it is not bad to listen to people online or your professors or even authority figures. It is just simply better to actually do research for yourself, to engage with philosophical and religious and political texts at their origins, not just through a curated version of what people say online or even what professors teach you. Because engaging with the content, the original content, is actually much more fulfilling and can give you a better sense of what people are saying in the first place. So, with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time.